How about if we recorded to the cloud? There we go. Gives me two choices. All right. Well, very good. Well, let's get started. This will be fun. Well, welcome back to the Probate Property Pro.com podcast. And we're the show that cuts through all of the complexities of estate and probate real estate sales. And we help families really navigate, one of the most challenging transitions with confidence and clarity, and that might be the loss of a loved one. So, um, I am an agent and a certified probate expert here in Northern Virginia, and I have the absolute pleasure of talking with one of my close friends, James Lewis. He is with the Fail4ward .com group now. He's a founder there, and
Right.
I first met James, a while back when, and I've known James for years, by the way. So we'll kind of talk about all that. But James, welcome. Good to have you. Caught you right in the middle of a drink. That's always awesome.
So good, man. Afternoon coffee is never too late or too early. Looks like I inspired you to do the same, so that's good.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
I'm I'm to water now because I've had my gallon of coffee already in the morning. So I kind of have to cut it off after that.
no, I get it. I get it. I have my 2-to-1 coffee ratio to water ratio in until about noon, and then I switch over. But today's a little different. I was up a little bit earlier in the 3 o'clock hour. And so thanks for having me though, man. Yeah, I mean, I love what you're doing. And we've known each other for years, like you said, and I'm happy to be here, be a guest, and hopefully add some value, to you, to those that listen, to those in need.
Yeah. Well, you're going to add a ton of value today because I know you as a man, and I know you as someone that I've worked with professionally as well. So really looking forward to this. Now, when we first met, you were a design consultant for a local custom builder, right? And you helped people navigate through the complexities of doing that. And one of the things that I really appreciated about you and working with you is your straightforwardness, and it didn't matter. What mattered most was what was best for your clients. And I love that. And that's what we're about here too. It's the same thing. It's like it's all up to the people that we serve, helping them achieve whatever their goals are, and bring our expertise to the forefront. So that's where we met. So the transition then to Fail4ward, how did that work? And I'm gonna have you talk about that a little bit, and then we're gonna go back to the beginning and talk about your life.
Yeah, yeah. So, Fail Forward was something that God put on my heart, some years ago. And more along the lines of just coming from a place of service. I have a heart of service. I don't believe you can separate the word leader or leadership from servant. And that's how I approach leadership. And to be honest with you, I just naturally find myself, serving, whether it be a client that's, purchasing something that I'm offering, whether it be a friend who's reaching out, because they have a need. That friend could be an executive, that friend could, be a manager, that friend could just be another great human being. And I found myself, really being that resource, but not taking note of it. Right. I was just being me. Until a few years passed, heavy in the real estate development space. As you know, it's not a 24-hour job per se, but it's definitely not a 9 to 5.
Mhm.
And my wife, came home one evening late after a trip and reminded me how she wanted to make sure I knew she was there too, because I was always on the phone. She's like, when people call, you answer. And every time I see you, you have that ear, that appendage in your ear, which is upstairs now. And for years, I apologized, Dave, because I, wasn't really paying attention to what she saw And even though she was just saying, "Hey, don't forget about me. I want to have a little time too in the evening."
Mhm.
What she was doing was showing me that I was truly committed to something that really filled my cup, right? Which was being a resource for others. And so you could go about that informally or you could go about it formally. And again, I felt God tugging on my heart, initially, and primarily for the young man, who's an adult in his early years. And then, expanding that out the way that I was already doing it to other professionals, right? Albeit, at the organizational level, or the, C-suite level, or even just like sometimes in an organization, it's a team, right? That has a manager and a specific service set, if you will. And so that's how it came about. I could give you some of the more particulars, but I think that those will come up along the way here.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting how what you mentioned really resonated with me. It's interesting how when you're doing what's natural to you, it kind of doesn't seem like work, and sometimes you end up apologizing for it a little bit because it's like, well, I'm just trying to help, right? Trying to help all my friends out there.
That's
So
right.
that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I love the fact that you have come full circle on that and stop apologizing for being you.
And I appreciate that you said that. So, initially when my wife said it, right, just going back, because it was just on the other side of where we are, I was working downstairs. Over the years, we rotate between the office and a more open setting. And I remember saying, I don't see the need to apologize about that. Like, I really love doing this, and of course,
Mhm.
having to put my husband ears on, which don't always work perfectly. That really, she was just saying, while you do what you do well and enjoy it in the process, I also want you to remember, us, right? Especially in the evenings. And I'm like, okay, so the two can coexist without there needing to be an apology in either direction. But what happened was truly, it took a few years still before I submitted myself to what I believe, I was being called to do. And at the moment I told my wife that, I said, this isn't just something I'm going to do casually. I feel like I'm being pulled to do this more intentionally. She looked at me and said, "We've been together for umpteen years. I've been waiting the whole time for you to say this." This is what she said to me. And so the way that it comes full circle, I couldn't let that slide when you said what you said. It's like, yeah, I'm not only enjoying it, my wife saw what she didn't feel it was her place, right, to call out and try to influence. She
Mm.
waited for me to again, submit myself to what she already saw I was doing, but with more intention. So anyway.
It's funny how you and I and a lot of people can make really brilliant choices, somehow in our life, and one of them is me marrying my amazing wife as well. And and sometimes they'll come out with something like that, and you're like, well, couldn't you have like given me a hint like a while back?
10 years, maybe 10, 11,
Yeah,
12 years ago.
decade or so ago. Couldn't you just like mention this once?
Oh
That's
man, I'm
perfect.
gonna write that down, Dave. The 10-year heads up, please and thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, please mention this a couple of decades earlier. Could save me a whole lot of time.
Oh my God. Uh,
So, so James, let's go back to, I know that, you've had an interesting past because we've talked about it briefly in the past. So I want to go back to where'd you grow up? How'd you do that? Tell me a little bit about your family, how you got to be where you are now.
yeah, so a lot of prayer and a lot of help. If we're going off of my answer in real time is, if you see me sitting in a position of success or you see something you like, admire, you respect, I'd say it comes from the favor of the good Lord and a lot of prayer and other people pulling me up. I'm a firm believer. None of us get to where we are, without the help of others. That's why I believe there are no individual wins, only shared wins. And so, to put some meat on those bones, with more explanation, I grew up in Baltimore City, and I grew up in West Baltimore City, which, if you just look at it the way that the nation talks about it, it would not be a very positive explanation around the area. And I think there, like most things, is some truth to that. But from my perspective, there was a lot of good. And it wasn't just me, that came from there that
Mm.
was good. There's a lot of other good people, and just things we experience here in the DMV that come out of Baltimore City. And so, my mom raised me single, and I'm adopted. I was awarded a state, and you know, there were some good people in her life. My pastor at the time, who I'm named after, actually, and also a physician she worked with, in a very specific role of both support and authority to that physician. So both my first and my middle name are those two names, former pastor and that physician. And they encouraged
Mm.
her to adopt. And so I grew up in Baltimore City, went to private school until high school when, I guess you'd say I got in enough, quote, innocent trouble, that I was, you know, given the opportunity to attend public high school. That's politely put. Fortunately, it was it was fortunately it was the best one in Baltimore City, and still is in many respects, in my opinion, the best one. But it's up there, in the top two for schools. My point is, I met my mentor midway through that public high school experience, and
Mm.
the rest is history. He taught me through action what it means to pay it forward. Because he was in his early 50s at the time. That was clearly some time
Mm.
ago. He's still here with us.
Mm.
Grateful to God for that man. Truly the most important man in my life. Um, and came from where you wouldn't have expected it, Baltimore City, right? Where I definitely had to do some dancing and dodging to get to where I am today, looking back at where it all started. And so I know that grazes the surface, but I went to school. I'm fortunate, master's prepared, but I'd like to say, education teaches you how to grit through sometimes what you think you love, but then you quickly find out you overpaid for, and simply needed to follow through on the commitment. I know a lot of parents out there, myself included, can attest to what the cost is. Um, but but at the end of the day, you know what I mean? I think in short summary, I was the underdog growing up in a lot of ways, right? I wasn't black enough in the black community that I grew up in. And when I went to school, particularly private school, I wasn't fair complexion, or affluent enough. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
so, that identity mismatch was present both at home and away from home, in a lot of ways. And yet, all walks of life, all shades, male, female, they all poured in. And that's how I got here today. So.
Mm. Wow, wow. And you mentioned too, your mentor, and it sounds like you have quite an affection and respect for that man in your life. Growing up with a single mom, that must have been interesting. I had the pleasure of having both my parents, until they were in their 90s, and
Wow.
so tell me a little bit about that. Growing up with a single mom, not having that male in your life at that point. I mean, you were adopted, so that means, I don't even ask you this question. Do you even know who your birth parents are? Right?
You know, that's a great question. What I can tell you is my birth mom had the same name as my adopted mom, to my knowledge, right? I never met her. What I can tell you is that my wife, and I am remarried happily. Some of us, it takes us more than one time to get it right. And I was one of them for sure. And so her family, her father in particular, knows my biological family, but not so closely because of where they're from, which is close to here, not even an hour from here, knows of
Mm.
them. But I didn't know my biological family, right? Growing up,
Yeah.
my biological father died when I was a baby, to my knowledge, and then my biological mom, to me, made a wise decision based on some other lifestyle choices that, were a priority to her, to put me up for adoption. So I have nothing but love, and gratitude for how that played out. Do I wish I was born into affluence? Absolutely. I wasn't. I was born into a great, family. My mom, late mom's name is Wanda Lewis, who taught me work ethic at a level that, if you've experienced this, when you see it and then you find yourself in it and you reflect back, you realize it wasn't her words, it was her actions. And
Mhm.
then the values that she instilled in me, had a strong biblical context. It was what I would consider that old devout Christian,
Yeah.
um, which I rebelled against in so many ways, and would like to say that today, I still profess and live as a Christian, but not perfectly, and I don't try for perfection. And so I guess you'd say I've evolved from what I was taught at a very young age, and that is what I remember growing up. We lived in
Mm.
church 5, 6 days a week, which I despised at the time. What child, you know, maybe would want that compared to maybe some of the other things that you could be doing instead? I did play sports, but it was church. It was church, church, church. And I didn't know that later in life how important having that instilled in you would be, like how substantive or how much substance it would represent in my life through the different challenges. I would even say fails or failures, shortfalls, growth opportunities. If I didn't know Jesus, man, I wouldn't be able to smile here and have the perspective that I do on a day-to-day basis. And my mom seeded all of that into me, and it was by far better, than the affluence that, I think many of us chase today, that we try to give our
Mm.
kids today. I think side by side, I'd take Jesus all day long over affluence, from the world. And that's a lesson that was born from growing up relatively poor in dollars,
Mm.
but not in values and in love. So, and I had men in my life. I will say this. My mom didn't date. That's not what I'm talking about. Actually, my mother was, when I say devout Christian, it was like pretty straight line, right? But the
Mhm.
men in the community, albeit church or the Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club or in the hospital where she worked, she positioned men in my life to have a positive impact nonetheless. Um, and I'm very grateful for that growing up, because I haven't had an idea growing up and being a young father of what that might be. As I, of course,
Mhm.
kind of did my own thing in terms of, first generation, let's do it, husband and wife, right?
Mhm. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your call out for having Jesus in your life. That's, paramount, right? I'm a firm believer that, if you, acknowledge him in all your ways, he will direct your paths, right? And that's the way it works. So appreciate that. Um, so then let's see let me ask you, how did this help you then to, let's transition a little bit into, your Fail4ward platform now, right?
Hmm.
And growing up like this, learning to be and I'm sure you've read the book, what is it, Go Giver, the Go Giver. Um, yeah, exactly. And so that's just, with a heart of giving and with a heart of helping, all of that. How did that then get you into, your Fail4ward?
Yeah, I thought I read that book. I was just sitting here kind of doing my mental Rolodex, and I haven't actually, to my knowledge, read that book. But
Got it
let me
around
throw
here
it back.
somewhere.
I was going to say, let me throw it back to you. What was the high level on that, so I don't make an assumption? Because I think I was making an assumption there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean the go giver is just having a life of service. That's what you do. Um, and so everything you do, if you lead with giving, lead with contribution,
Hmm.
and I'm totally oversimplifying this. So all those you out there listening to this podcast, get the book and read it for yourself. But that's what it was. It was like, if you lead with that, you don't ever have to worry about someone taking you incorrect, taking you by mistake and thinking that you've got a motivation that's other than just that, right? Um, yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's
I
in essence
mean,
the book.
I appreciate that. And so, okay, so I think the title, was really helpful in getting those juices flowing for me with that. You know, I don't, I just don't believe we were put here for ourselves. I believe, I don't want to make this too faith heavy for anybody who, is listening and doesn't necessarily see it the same way. But I will say, that I do believe we were put here to fellowship with other people. And in that fellowship, sometimes we find ourselves as the recipient of love, of grace, of service. And then other times we find ourselves as the giver. In the real estate space, I've gone to many an event and they call it the get give, right? Or the give get, depending on how you,
Mm.
you know, want to look at it. But there's this book by Adam Grant called Give and Take. And as you get into the book, there's actually three categories, not two, like the title would lead you to believe. It's
Mhm.
givers, takers, and matchers. And I'm not saying that in any given moment we're all in one or the other, right? All of us probably step in and out, of those three different categories. But I find that partnering with others every day for the win-win for many years was my exact mantra until I got clearer on my mission statement, my own personal mission statement, right?
Mhm.
Because that's what I sought out. How can I help? And I just trusted that in this lovely world that good overrides evil, and that when I found myself in a place of need, as I experienced historically, that I would be blessed, as I needed. And
Mhm.
so, and it really helped me to um, not that I didn't sometimes get it stepped on in the process, but walk through life with a heart posture of serving others and do it irrespective of the outcome. Understanding I did it because I wanted to, not because I had to. So, and I did learn that from my mom. I try not to be emotional about it, but sometimes when you find yourself not having as much time or time anymore with meaningful relationships with people that mean a lot to you, you know, um, you can reflect more deeply, right? Things
Mhm.
happening around you become less important, right? Because you're really, really going deeper and introspective. And so I'm reminded, and I'll close this question unless you want me to expound on it further, but I'll close it with this piece. When my mom was in the hospital, she had been in the hospital for an extended period of time, right? She closed out her last 7 to 8 months of life in the hospital, with the exception of about 2 to 3 weeks in between. Now, towards the end of that time, let's call it May, around Mother's Day. I don't remember. My birthday's in May, Mother's Day's in May. But what I remember was I went to the hospital. It had been obviously, if she was in there since November the year before, with the exception of 2 weeks, that's a long time. And I said to
Mhm.
her, I said, Mom, this ties into the question, I promise. I said, Mom, are you giving up? Right? I couldn't tell, right? She was verbal,
Mhm.
this is just me as her son. Think about the relationship we've had and over the years. And she didn't answer yes or no. She quoted scripture. She said, "Be ye
Mhm. Yeah.
steadfast, unmovable, movable, always abounding in the work of the Lord." And I felt
Mhm.
like what she was saying to me was, if it's in God's will, it's okay with me. But if you look at the end of that scripture, right, if we're always abounding in the work of the Lord, whether you know him or not, just Google him. And what you'll see is all the good that comes from what he does. And I
Mhm.
believe that we weren't put here just for ourselves. We were put here in his image. to serve and to lead that way. That was what I wanted to come back to. And so I'm not successful all the time, but on my best day, you'll notice me doing that.
Excellent. I love that. I love that. So, so taking then fail forward as a concept,
Mhm.
and founding your company, how does this now manifest itself? One of the things that you'd mentioned to me in the past was the young man that's on your heart, and that's maybe parallel to the executives that you might help and all that. So, kind of walk us through that. Tell us a little bit about Fail Forward, and and how that manifests itself into um, into your value proposition, if you will, to use a company, a business term. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You know, the young man, especially me, because I have four sons, I have five children and four sons, three of which are adults, right? All of my children are from 28 down to 15. My youngest is my youngest son, Parker. He's 15. And seeing yourself sometimes in your children and in their friends, um, and just again, I shared with you my heart posture. I'm an empath. And so realizing not just from what I was hearing that was being said directly, but what wasn't being said, I realized, young men need safe spaces, safe third spaces. For me, I had home, church, but school didn't feel very safe, even though I did very well in it. And so imagine if we were able to create that space intentionally um, for young men. Sometimes you grow up without a father like I did. Sometimes you grow up with a father, but the relationship is strained. Sometimes, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different scenarios.
Yeah.
But there's this actually, I'm going to use the wrong language, but there's this, let's not use the word masculine. Let's just emasculinate, men. Um, as a man, to make sure we're heard, let's do so through toxic masculinity. There's the opposite, right? And
Mm,
you need a safe third space where you can just be you. And I think
yeah.
that a lot of times, not having that means we hold things in. So you hear these types of things, men don't talk as much, and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to, I've realized how much I was learning from young men just sitting there and listening instead of talking at them. And
Mhm. Yeah.
and this idea of failure being a bad word, I thought we're all relying on the next generation of young men, young women, right? Just the next generation, period. What if there was a way, as we listened, we could talk more about things that were uncomfortable, not as a negative? And so I thought of what's the one word growing up we all heard that was bad, and it was failure. And I know what it's like to feel that way. And I said, what if we changed the narrative of the word failure to something positive? What if we shifted it from a noun or an identity to a verb every time something doesn't go like we want it to go? So the outcome the came before the lesson. What if we just took it as data to continue to move forward? And so it started there, and then I grew it. I said, well, how old am I? What are my responsibilities? Imagine if I did the same thing with all of what I'm managing and how
Mhm.
I lead those that are afraid to fail, right? And how we shift that perspective to something not that isn't going to happen or should be hidden, but that is something that's going to happen naturally, and that it is a necessity to embrace it. And that's where, after seeing too many or so many people paralyzed by the fear of getting it wrong, um, I began to change my language about failure into not the opposite of success, but instead the data that you need to achieve it. I even would like to think that I, probably use this term more than about 99% of people out there, successful failure. We meet each other when we're successful, but we don't talk about the things that helped us get there. And it was not all pure bliss and success. And so that's where it came from, Dave. And
Mm,
I
mhm.
want companies and individuals who will buy into what I believe is a movement around changing this narrative and reframing this narrative around failure into something positive. I want them to not only win, but I want them to keep winning in a way that it catches on so that as a world, right, we don't attack one another for our fails as much as we do look to them for the opportunity that they present to be better, not just as individuals, but on the whole. And I know it's possible. And I know I'm not the only one that believes this is America and it's still the best country in the world. And we didn't get there by being successful at everything. We currently are not successful at everything. But if we can reframe our fails into something that's positive, I think we can stay number one. And I do believe also we can continue to improve as a leader. So,
Well, it's interesting that you say that. Well, it made me think of statistics, right? Not that I'm a statistician because I'm not, right? I barely got through. Well, I didn't barely get through it. I thought it was an okay class, but in college I did all right in statistics, but I wasn't a, straight A student in it by any stretch. You think about things.
mhm.
Um, our business, right? In real estate, if you are, you look at the numbers, right? Most great realtors are batting 500 on the people that they talk with. Half the people will choose them, half the people won't. And that's really good,
Really
right?
good. That's a close
If
ratio.
you
I mean, that's wow.
huge, it's huge, it's huge.
Wow.
If you could do that, you would just be like, this is great. For every two people I talk to, I get one client. That would be awesome. It's more like, you know, even a good statistic is 25%, one in four,
Mhm.
still great, right? Think of baseball, every time they go up to the plate, it's like if somebody's batting 500, they are a rock star, right? If you look on the stats for baseball players, and I'm not a baseball player, I was a wrestler, right? So that's got its own statistics, right? But in baseball, if you're batting what, 200, is that good? 250?
Yeah.
Awesome. That means that you miss that means that you strike out three out of the four times, but you're still awesome, right? And you're still making, bukus of money. You're playing in the pros, right? So it's just
Right.
that. It's like when you think about it, failure. Another example I heard recently was, and I'm going to get this wrong, but Thomas Edison and creating the light bulb. How many tries? 10,000 tries or whatever it was, right? He just determined, 9,999, ways that it didn't work, right? you know, so that's the whole thing. And I think that so failure, redefining failure as something that not to fear, but something actually to embrace and maybe something to eagerly try to fail fast.
Oh, there's a saying, Dave, if I can jump in. You've
Mhm.
heard, I'm sure many of us have, fail early, fail often, right? And I like to say, something similar to that. It's fail early, fail often, fail fearlessly, fail forward. And listening to the data, right? It doesn't even have to be perfect data because the picture you're painting is that on a best case scenario, we all accept that if we go after something, we at least have, in some respects, a 50-50 chance of it going one way or another. But the truth is looking at some of the examples you pointed out, many of us accept, right, and measure success to not reflect a 50-50 chance, which means the likelihood, this is a life statement that I believe many of us, if we're being honest, would say, yep, I agree, which is we statistically fail more than we succeed. That's the point that you're getting at.
Mhm.
We
For sure.
get an outcome different than what we would hope more times than the other way. And so those of us that get comfortable doing that and don't allow ourselves to be stuck are the ones that get referred to as OGs in this game who have had success over the course of many years. And that, by definition, makes us successful failures.
Yeah.
Except when we put the two words together, it confuses our brain because it sounds negative and positive. And in that instance, I believe that's where success overcomes failure because you have success as a result of your willingness to fail early, fail often, fail fearlessly, and fail forward. And that's why our brand slogan is everyone fails, winners fail forward. Who doesn't like to win?
Mhm.
And so, like
Mhm.
in a corporate environment, someone's like, "Huh, what are you really doing for us?" It's like, if you're already winning, I'm helping you win more. If you're not winning and you're stuck, I'm helping you get unstuck. So in the reframe, your results and your performance go up, which is what you want in business, but it doesn't start necessarily in business. It starts in people
Mhm.
who happen to be in
Mhm.
the business. So
Yep. 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 Interesting. Interesting. And so, how do you flip that switch in someone's brain that is, gee, if I fail, I'm a loser, versus the flip of that, which is, well, I just, I feel failing is part of life, and actually statistically, you do that more often than you win. So this is just another one. Let's keep rolling. How do you flip that switch?
yeah, well, like any other neural pathway, not overnight, right? It is a process. There's no way that you can go through K through 12 in America and being told that a failure is bad, and then all of a sudden it takes you less time to re-engineer that. But I do believe as an adult, you have an ability because you're not being told what to do. You're actively choosing, uh, this is how I'm going to do it. I think that the fastest path and the most proven path that I've seen with my clients and personally is to shift my perspective on failure from being a noun, right? Something that I label myself as when something doesn't go as I hope, to
Mhm.
a verb, which is something that tells me that an action of some kind, usually that's different, is what's required due to an outcome not being what I had hoped or that was needed in that moment. So that means when something happens, it becomes data instead of
Mm.
definition,
Mm. Yeah. Yeah,
right?
that's great. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Data. It's a stat as opposed to a label,
That's it. That's it.
a
And when you
marker.
start
Mhm.
doing
Mhm.
that, other people can look at you, publicly or otherwise, and label, right? Define, and you can receive it because they may have something objectively valuable in what they're sharing with you, but you don't have to own it the same way that they're delivering it because who you are is your choice. Okay?
Mhm.
What you're labeled as in the eyes of someone else is their definition. And so
Mhm.
part of being accountable to oneself, right, is taking the data in that's helpful and applying it, and then taking the data in that's not and setting it aside, realizing it goes into a different pot. And I think that that's a very intentional um, action, and both require a lot of energy and work. You might as well do the work that's going to get you the action, the outcome, and the results that you want. And I think that that's what I love about it is that it's a fun game to play with yourself as an adult when life lifes. You're like, whoops, didn't go as I had hoped. It's okay. What am I going to do differently instead of, I'm a failure.
Yeah, yeah,
So.
yeah. Interesting. Interesting. So it's almost like, you know, you are in charge of the definition of you, and others are not.
I missed that last part, Dave. I think we got disconnected briefly.
Yeah. So I said that, you are in charge of the definition of you, and others are not. Right?
Yeah, yeah. I look at it
Yeah.
this way, right? And this is what I tell my clients, particularly the guys, right? And it's a pretty hard line, right? I don't soften it, right? I say, what kind of man do you want to be? And who's stopping you from being it,
Mhm.
right? And those are two questions for you to
Yeah.
answer for you. And so when you make the decision as for the type of person, right? Let's make it a little more broad because in organizations, obviously it changes, right? Team, culture, organization, right? It may not be man, right, as an individual. Um, and once you get clear on that, then go be it.
Hmm.
That's the directive, right?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
actionable step. It doesn't matter what someone else's definition is, right? If you are in an organization, right, that does not align with your values, you still have data from that experience that tells you reposition yourself out of that environment so that you can be the best version of you in an environment that cultivates who you want to be. It may be
Mhm.
uncomfortable, but it's data nonetheless, and data that you get to decide what to do with it. And so, you know, I'm not going to, in a short period of time like this, probably be able to wrap it all in to make it universally make sense. But I hope that the way I frame that out points it back to it's a choice that we all get to
Mhm.
make.
And it seems if you're making that choice for yourself, if you are in charge of why you're not succeeding,
Hmm.
then then you have eliminated that whole gee, I'm a victim of somebody else, right? I'm in charge of me. And if I'm failing and I'm in charge of that, then I change my behavior in some way to modify that so that it is successful, right? So yeah, yeah, I
And
love
that
that.
bridge, Dave, that bridge, the way you describe that, when you do that, sometimes on social media, I'll say, and because of that, or when you're doing that, you're not failing, you're failing forward, right?
Exactly.
Because again, that's an act, you took an action
Mhm.
that aligned with your values, right? You owned it. So that's how could you be a failure, right? The missing ingredient there that separates failure as a noun and a verb is action. That's the missing
Yeah,
ingredient.
love it, love it. So let's switch gears a little bit, and that's great. I love that. So what does the Lewis household do? James, your wife, and this could include the kids or not. You said that some of them are, they're like 15 to 28. So I'm guessing that the ones that are above 20 are like off someplace else right now. Um, so what do the Lewises do for recreation? What do you do when you're not, um, you know, doing your day job, if you will, if you're not, and go, putting yourself into the fail forward mode.
Yeah. Well, my wife will tell you I'm an old soul, so I have a hard time keeping up with her. She has just a few years on me in age, but I think that was the good Lord's way of saying that's the only way that I would have qualified, to be her husband, is to balance that scale. So, yeah, balance that scale a little bit. And so, when we first met, Dave, you had an Indian, you had a
Scout,
motorcycle.
yeah. Mhm,
Yep.
yeah.
And so you
Still
still have
do.
it. You still have
Oh
it?
yeah. Oh,
Okay.
oh yeah, for sure.
So cool. So you outlasted me. I sold my Harley last
Mm.
year after owning
Mm.
it for 7 years and having 2,600 miles on it after buying it brand
Uh,
new. I kind of felt bad. I was just kind of guilt.
mm.
That guilt was eating at me watching it get dusty in the garage. And
Well, I
so,
won't. I won't tell you. I won't tell you how many miles are on my Indian then, because I would be embarrassed as well. It's
oh,
not nearly enough.
no,
And
no.
and you know the story. I won't go into detail, but it's not actually my Indian. It's my wife's Indian.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah. And my wife bought my bike. So to be very clear, you know what I mean?
perfect.
Anyway. So that's what we used to do, right? We would, just carve out an hour in the evening. We live in an area where we're surrounded by um, lots of back roads, and so we have the privilege of being able to do that in the evenings. And so we don't do that anymore. And so I think at this point, still love game night. Game night is something we did with our family that we prioritized. My wife championed that. All this good you hear me saying about my wife, she rubbed off on me, and I got to have some of those great experiences. Our friends, all the same. We try, especially as the weather shifts between our homes, We have a nice outdoor space. They have, some nice outdoor spaces. And so we try to make sure that we have that social time amidst the hustle and bustle of the DMV.
Mm, mm,
Church for sure is hugely is still a priority. We serve in our local church together. And so, somewhere in the realm of a handful of hours or more on a Sunday or two a month. And so I would say, that's the bulk of it. And we love shows too, Dave. We love to sit down and get wrapped
mm,
into a show, because it's kind of like that time where we're together, but it's light, right?
mhm.
We're not thinking about the kids in those moments. We're not thinking about what we're doing work-wise. I think we usually try to keep our phones, away. That's what we do. And of course, travel. We would like to do more of it than we do. But we are still in kind of some core years of what I would say service being the primary focus
Mm.
and
Yeah.
parenting. And
And
so that's
parenthood,
what
yeah.
we yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's some great shows out now too. I mean, it used to be, growing up, and I'll date myself. We had three channels to watch. And it was kind of like you'd wait for the episode next week because that's what you did, right?
That's
Now
right.
with Netflix and Paramount Plus and Prime and all that stuff, there's some great content out there that's just like really interesting. Some of them more edgy than others, but it's fun to watch. So we do that too here a lot. We same way with church. You know, trust. I have the honor of being a trustee at the Clifton Baptist Church in Clifton, Virginia, which is the last small town in Fairfax County. Right? No other
Yeah.
small towns. The rest of them are metropolises. So, just I love that. So I love your heart for, spending time with your wife, spend time with your family. Um, we're not much on game people, but we were at the beach this last weekend, and we always go. We went with some friends that I've known for 40 years, and we played this game called Blank Slate. Have you know
Ah,
what that is?
no, no, tell
So
me.
you get a little slate and a little dry erasing marker, and you have cards, and it's a card that you pull out, and it's got a word and a blank, or a blank and a word, right? And
Mhm.
so it would be like, you know, cow blank. And so you write down what your answer is, and it's usually better with like four people. It was hilarious with our friends because it was just so funny because we've known one another forever, and some of us would look at the others and go, "I know what you're going to put down," So, and if you match with one other person, you get 3 points. If you match with two other people, you get 1 point. If you match with everybody, or don't match with, or no one matches with anybody, you get 0 points, right? So it's a point game. Hilarious. So cow, cow blank, bell, cow pie, whatever. And you can come up with some crazy stuff. It's just hilarious anyway. So something to add to your game night.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Our famous game, if you will. I mean, we play Skippo and Uno because they're quick, the attention span of the
Mm.
kids, they're still competitive, etc. But charades of some kind. There's all kinds of rebranded games from Taboo to something about words of humanity that are adults only or whatever, like it's just
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
what,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
it's you can dress it up however you want, but we love charades because you got to kind of actively participate. So my
Yeah, and
favorite
if you
all
want,
time
if
is
you want
still
to get,
Monopoly.
well, I was just going to say that if you want to get in for the long haul, it's Monopoly for sure,
Yeah.
for
My
sure.
wife can't
And
stand that game.
we had a version of that when we were kids growing up, called Big Business, and it's Monopoly on steroids. It's so fun. I don't even know if they make the game anymore, but it's awesome. So anyway, well, that's cool. That's cool. So fail4ward.com. What's your dream? What's this look like in a year? What's it look like in 5 years? What's it look like in a decade for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna purposely not time define it here. But in the future, I'll share this with you.
Okay.
Um, my, I'll share with you my mission too before we conclude. But if I was to short form define how I want to live out every day in service, particularly through Fail Forward coaching, it's to make a difference while making a living. It's
Mm,
take
mm,
all that God has blessed me with and grown me through and to make this world a better place. And I want to do it both at the corporate level and for our rising stars, which you heard me say, particularly the young men, right?
mm,
I'd like to really cover it across the board. And, living in the DMV, knowing the pace here in the DMV, I know there's a need for us to slow down sometimes so we can
mm,
continue to speed up in the right direction. And so where I see fail forward is in organizations, shifting narratives around things like the word failure, and mistakes, and the world becomes a better place. One client, one company, one individual, however you want to say it, at a time. And if I made a video early last year before really soft launching even on social media.
mm.
And I was sitting here, I had on a blue flannel. Oh, interestingly enough, it was a different one. And I said 4 million successful failures.
Mm,
That's what is on my heart. Now I chose 4 million, not fully from a place of it being arbitrary, because fail forward has a four in the middle. But that's the type of impact that I see. I see people smiling when they hear the word failure instead of frowning. And when that
mm.
happens, I will feel like we're getting closer to the mission being met. Because people will then not fear it as much as they will faith that, have faith through it. And
Mm,
anyway, I know that's not so defined, but I wanted to go macro level here, to really just for whoever listens, whoever watches, whoever shares this to know, that that's where we're going. And it's going to not be separate,
mm.
just organizations or just individuals. And I say that, Dave, this last part I have to say because people think that when they like, whether it's the person who's not the executive or the person who's the executive with maybe a legacy approach to what that means. I mean, when you have an executive client, you don't separate who they are as a person from who they are in the business, although the healthiest executive knows how to do that. But from the coach's
Mhm.
standpoint, it's one person, right?
Right, right.
And so when an executive comes to work and shifts from, um, how do you say, penalizing their, I just put this on LinkedIn, when they learn how to not just be a cheerleader or a critic, and they start to understand what it means to have a coaching mindset themselves, they start to grow their team and by default see their company grow. And so,
Mhm.
like that to me, when I think about fail forward, I'm one person. So I want this to be, and this is dangerous, because you never know how people will respond to this when they hear this word, but a movement. I want it to be
Yeah.
a positive or a reframed failure movement, fail forward movement. That's, and I get excited about it. You can tell because I know
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
possible because we all can relate. It's just shifting to what that reframe is.
So faith through failure, faith your way through failure.
Oh
That's
my gosh.
interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Instead of faking it until you make it, faith it until you make it.
Faith until
That's
you make it.
faith it
I
till
love
you
it.
till you
Yeah.
make it. And the thing is that when we stop penalizing one another, when we come up short or we don't quite make the mark, and we step back to objectively look at that as a good thing, because with that data, we're
Mhm.
now going to move forward what? Better, because we have that extra data. When we stop competing against one another to our detriment and start winning with one another,
Mhm.
I just don't, like, I can't wait because, like,
Mhm.
I know every organization doesn't doesn't buy into that. I know every executive doesn't buy into that. I know every human doesn't, but the ones that do and they lean in, they're going to
Hmm.
be the light. They're going to be the ambassador for the reframe around failure. And those that they come in contact are going to be blessed. And then the people they come in contact with are going to be blessed. And it's going to be positively contagious in a way where naturally failure is no longer going to be a bad word, Dave. And
Hmm.
that's what I'm saying. I don't even have to be here when it happens. I just believe that it's not only possible, I just can't wait, you know, see it happen. So I have
Well,
grandkids, just like you.
I
So
have, I have faith that you'll be here to see it when it happens. The Lord's going to show you the result of your good work, my
thank you.
friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's awesome. So tell us how we can get a hold of you. Fail4ward.com is your website. How else? So you mentioned LinkedIn, you mentioned social media. Kind of give us your digits, and we'll put them in the notes too.
Thank you for that, Dave. Yeah, absolutely. So, fellowship is one of the core pillars of the confidence blueprint, right, that we put out. And so, I would love to connect with others. And so, our website is www.fail, spelled exactly as you would think, the number four, WARD. I want to be very clear, .com. I know it's a different spelling, but you can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on Instagram, our handle for Instagram and TikTok. I'm not on TikTok as much at this current juncture, but it's the same handle. The at symbol, the real fail forward, spelled the same way, FAIL, the number four, WARD. And you can fill out a contact form. We'll do a complimentary session, no matter where you fall in the spectrum of individual, executive, organization. At the end of the day, we want to make sure it's a good fit because we believe that
Mhm.
when you work with us, it should be value forward. So,
And I'm sure it will be. I'm sure it will be. You have a presence on Facebook as well?
you know what? Yes, because it's linked to Instagram. And so what I would say is my team spends more time monitoring Instagram, but yes, the two are hand in hand. So if
Mhm.
we post on
Sure.
one, it usually shows up on the other, and you can reach us there as well.
Yeah, that's where ours are too. Okay, well, great. Well, we've been with James Lewis, the founder of Fail Forward with a four. And thank you so much for being with us. Um,
Thank you.
if you want to get a hold of me, and I would love to help anyone as well who's, my focus is to help folks that are navigating that estate probate property, and we can, help organize a property, help remove stuff from a property, help prep that property for sale, and any number of flavors that we can do, either sell as is to total renovation of a building or of a property for someone too. So depending, of course, on our clients and what their goals are. So if you're looking for speed and convenience, well, we can help you sell it as is. If you're looking for maximum return, we can help you do that as well by the appropriate updates and all that. So you can reach out to us at the probatepropertypro.com, and or you can email me also at dave@thekazagroup.com. So thanks for being with us, James. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to continuing on as we go. So appreciate
I'm
it.
here for you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right.